Stjernholm Reviews, your sound, your music, your planet.
I have been working with audio and being an analytical, curious listener for over 40 years. Many of them behind a mixing desk. As an audiophile and consultant, I'm still amazed about how often I still discover differences in sound and the way the sound makes me feel. Not easily explained. One such thing is the source playing digital sound files. Why is it that playing the same bits through the same DAC can be experienced differently? If bits are bits, what is actually changing?
The impossible can become possible if you're awesome!
Stjernholm Reviews is a non-monetized channel. We work for nature preservation, collecting donations via Patreon. Join the ranks and get access to exclusive content and expert advice for less than the price of a cup of coffee a month.
Truth achievers, we build, we play, we give it back. We are the mighty Silverback.
Your sound, your music, your planet.
You rip a CD and you save that exact same file on a drive. You play it over Roon via your network, but if I instead play the CD through a CD player connected digitally to the same DAC or via a file player connected through the USB port where the files are stored locally, it sounds different. Not in volume, not in frequency content, but different, calmer. Same amplifier, same DAC chips, same ones and zeros. So why does it feel different? If bits are bits, what is actually changing?
Let's go deep.
In digital audio, what matters most is that the data reaching the DAC is bit perfect. That means that the zeros and ones are identical whether streamed or played from a drive. So the difference can't be in the digital file itself now, can it? Your brain just doesn't hear bits. Your brain hears the analog waveform that the DAC creates from those bits. And that analog waveform is subject to factors beyond the bits themselves. Now we're getting somewhere. So what happens between bits and sound? The DAC converts digital to analog. To do that, it needs a clock. That clock decides when each sample is converted. Any variation in that timing is called jitter, tiny timing errors in when samples are output. Those errors produce analog distortion and noise in the reconstructed waveform. Critically, even if bits are identical, the timing of the delivery to the DAC's clock circuitry can vary based on the playback path. Different paths, like USB from a local drive or network streaming over Roon or real-time reading from a CD transport, create different electrical timing conditions at the DAC input. So what's up with playing from a local drive versus network streaming? When you play from a local internal drive on a file player, the data path is direct, usually simpler. The file system reads the data and feeds it to the DAC with minimum intermediate layers. There's very little networking or heavy OS activity going on. When Roon, for example, streams over a network, the data flows through layers. First the Roon server software, and then the network stack routers or switches, the network interface, there's buffering, and then into your endpoint. All of that happens before the DAC ever sees a sample. None of this changes the bits if everything is done correctly, but it can change the electrical and timing environment at the DAC input because of differences in clocking, buffering, and noise, especially via asynchronous network protocols and buffers. Buffering solves dropouts and keep the stream continuous, but it introduces another layer where timing is resynchronized and hand it off to the DAC's internal clock. If the DAC has a strong, stable clock, it resets this jitter and the timing noise super effectively. But if the DAC uses the incoming data timing, as many designs do to some extent, the nature of that network buffer handoff can shape the analog result. But some say that playing the CD sounds better. Yeah, but CD transport also do this differently. It reads the disk in real time with built-in error correction. The data path is fundamentally simpler. It reads a sector and uses error correction, and then outputs a continuous bit stream with the embedded clocking into the DAC. The network stack, buffering layers, and asynchronous handoffs does not exist there. So although the bits are the same, the electrical and clock timing environment at the DAC input can be different. In the CD transport case, you get real-time sector reading and clock embedding that some DAC implementations handle differently. That's why some listeners sometimes report dedicated transports sounding different. Another factor that doesn't change the bits but affects the analog output is noise. Computers, routers, and network switches all introduce electrical noise into power rails and onto data lines. Even if the data is intact, that noise couples to the DAC's analog stages or ground plane and changes the analog output. Audiophiles talk about this a lot because the analog result feels different even when technically the digital stream was perfect. And then there's the perception and expectation, what we could call the brain's expecting a certain experience. There's a powerful psychological element to that. Our brains is wired to hear patterns and context. If you expect Roon over network to sound different from a CD player, your brain might shape your experience. That's where blind tests often show that bit-perfect sources can be totally indistinguishable. So what's really different? Let's try to sum up things that can actually be at play here. The bits themselves are the same when the playback is bit perfect, but those bits can be delivered and clocked into the DAC differently. The timing that can result in jitter, electrical noise, buffering, and interface paths all shape the analog waveform we hear. If the DAC is given clean power and has clean ground and a stable clock that is not influenced by the incoming data stream, then the network delivery should not matter at all. So the entire game is about decoupling the DAC from the network, and that's exactly what some relatively simple products claim they are designed to do. The most effective solution is not a tweak. It's an architecture thing, like high-quality streamers and network players that are designed so the DAC does not follow the timing of the incoming data. That's those really expensive things you see where there's an external clock present and the product has an external clock input. Instead, the streamer buffers the data deeply and then outputs it using its own ultra-low noise master clock that are ultimate precise. In other words, the network becomes just a delivery truck and then everything is put into perfect order before being delivered to the DAC. This is how products from some of the really high-end companies like Lin and DCS and Lumin or Render in its better implementations are designed from the ground. Jitter from the network is mathematically and electrically irrelevant because the DAC actually never sees it. The other thing we can look into is things like galvanic isolation that I'm a big fan of personally. That means we break the electrical path. So it's not timing, it's actually about electricity. Ethernet cables carry data, but they also carry noise through ground reference and leakage. That noise can couple into sensitive DAC circuitry. And no, you don't fix that with a really expensive Ethernet cable. You fix it with galvanic isolation that breaks that path. It can be done using Ethernet transformers, that those are already a part of the standard, but quality varies. Optical Ethernet links, which I'm a big fan of, USB isolators, if it's a USB device, and network isolators with internal power regeneration. Devices from iFi and Mutech do exactly this. They stop electrical garbage from entering the DAC altogether while letting the data through unchanged. And here's an important point. These devices do not improve bits, they reduce the noise that could otherwise modulate the analog output stage. So let's touch on the so-called reclockers and word clock discipline. Some systems go even further and introduce that external reclocking I talked about. Here, the idea is to regenerate the digital signal entirely using a reference clock orders of magnitude more stable than what's inside a typical streamer or computer. Companies like Mutech, DCS, and Esoteric build systems where everything locks to a master clock.
Professional. Very cool stuff. You know, boom.
This can be extremely effective, but only if the DAC is designed to accept and probably use that external clock, as I talked about earlier.
Like I said, very cool stuff.
It's not a universal fix. It's very system dependent, as the product should allow for the external input. Now the uncomfortable part. Fancy Ethernet cables, my friends, do not change data integrity. Ethernet already has error correction. There's no such thing as better bits. They simply don't exist, okay? And network switches with RGB lights do not improve sound. If the DAC already fully reclocks and isolates its input, adding a lot of boxes upstream often changes nothing measurable or audible. In many modern DACs, the problem is already solved internally, which brings us to the most important point of all. If a system sounds different depending on whether the music comes from Roon, a local drive, or CD transport, or any whatever streaming service, one of two things is happening. Either the DAC is still somewhat influenced by upstreaming timing or noise, or your brain is reacting to subtle changes in presentation, context, or your own expectation. I switched. I hear a difference. I put on another power cable. I heard a difference. You know that feeling? Both can be true at the same time, and neither means you're stupid or deaf or imagining things. But here's the grounding truth we should hang on to. The goal of good digital audio design is not better bits. It's making the delivery of bits irrelevant. When that is achieved, the only thing left that matters is the music. And that, my friends, brings us full circle. Because in the end, none of this matters if the system doesn't make you feel something. Music is not a checksum, it's an experience. And the best systems are the ones that disappear and let that experience happen. That's why my universal shout out will always be,
Will you just taste the soup? All right, I'll taste the soup. Where's the spoon? Aha! Aha! What do you know from funny, you bastard?
Thank you for watching. Consider supporting me on Patreon. All money is donated directly to nature preservation efforts, and you get access to tons of exclusive content as well as direct advice from me. See you there.
Sound engineering, a most satisfying result.
Satisfying? Walter, my brain hurts. All them numbers. All that talking. What's wrong with a good old record player now?
That means the system is working, Earl.
I waited so long, and then Patricia only pops in like a flash of lightning for a second. I waited so long for that, like a little feller waiting on Christmas morning. I waited.